Good morning and welcome to Godless Bitches 2.0. It is, you like the name?
Yeah.
The episode is number 9 of season 4 and it is September 29th, 2018. I'm Clare Wuellner and joining me today are Jen Peeples,
Hey,
the
everybody.
regular and also regularly on the Atheist Experience, one of the best hosts in my opinion. And then over here is Leanne Cameron, who will be talking to us a little bit about a topic that's super pertinent these days. So first of all, let's go through the normal stuff. Godless Bitches 2.0 is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. So, first, let's talk about a few things that are in the news. And I guess since things have been moved around a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, Leanne, because you can chime in on the things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the Kavanaugh Ford business. We're a 501c3, so we can't talk about partisan things, but this isn't partisan. This has to do with so many things that have to do with secular humanism and just separation of church and state in a giant way. So, Leanne Cameron is a licensed professional counselor and somatic experience practitioner and is a somatic and psychotherapist in Austin, Texas. Leanne specializes in working with survivors of sexual trauma as well as developmental trauma. Leanne holds a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from UT Austin and a Master's of Education with a concentration in Rehabilitation Counseling, also from UT Austin. Leanne worked for over 22 years at the Safe Alliance, which used to be the Safe Place, and originally the Austin Rape Crisis Center. Leanne also has experience working with people with disabilities. Special areas of expertise include providing trauma-informed counseling and working with male survivors. Leanne strives to provide culturally sensitive services to people of color, people who identify as LGBTQ+, and to immigrants and other marginalized populations. Leanne is a survivor of sexual violence. She also loves cats, live music, swimming in Barton Springs, and that is a thing here in Austin, and working to create a better world. Well, we are very much of kindred spirit in that way. So I want to just talk a bit about things that are making me feel a little bit better about what's going on, because I don't think this is all bad. Women are pissed.
Yes.
And some of the stuff I've seen is extraordinarily empowering, right? Yep. So, Mark, could you put up the photograph of the steps of the courthouse where this is occurring? There are flowers and notes from people. When I saw that, it just really moved me. They have had to remove more than 200 women from the proceedings because they've been disruptive. That is freaking amazing. Yes. I love that. Look at this image. It's just amazing. Yeah. Women are coming out everywhere. And a couple of the things that have struck me as I've interacted with various and sundry jerks on social media is that they don't understand what trauma is. They don't understand what it means to experience it, why people don't report it, when you do report it, why it's so hard, how someone who has been a person who does assault, how they behave, how you recognize the usual things that they do when they are accused of it. And wow, is this a textbook case? But don't take it from me. We're going to take it from the expert here. And so one of the things that I found empowering is I was part of a meeting for Secular Coalition of America where they talked about everything that they are doing, coordinating among all sorts of organizations to send in amicus briefs and letters. I mean, this is big. So let me just find... It's okay, there's this giant letter, and I won't read it to you, but it basically says, Kavanaugh is a problem, and, excuse me while my slow computer catches up, and it's signed by, the primary thing that they're bringing up is separation of church and state. So they're not even talking about the things that we're going to talk about today, really. But it includes a giant number of organizations signing on it, including everything from African American Ministers in Action to American Atheists, Hindu American Foundation Interfaith Alliance, Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, all across the board. Nobody cares what religion you are, what your political leanings are. Separation of church and state is crucial. Kavanaugh clearly has no regard for it. And in fact, not just no regard, he fights for breaking it down and has been explicit about this on several fronts. So I have the amicus brief, too, that talks about the specifics of, like, point by point of where he is bad and wrong.
Well, while you're pulling that up,
you go.
I just want to point out that Yale Law School has come out against confirming him without further investigation. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty significant because, like, the crown jewel of any law school is to have one of your graduates appointed to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So for Yale Law School to come out and say, "Yeah, we don't think you should be rushing to confirm this guy," you know, that's huge. We have to, look at that,
right?
And give that the proper weight,
right. And the thing that really worries me is that they have given him another week to talk. What they're counting on is people going away. Don't.
Yeah.
Call, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, call your representative and say this man is completely bad and wrong for the Supreme Court. He would do so much damage. I don't care where you stand on abortion. I don't care where you stand on anything. Separation of church and state is essential for the running of our country. You wanted to say something, Leanne?
I was just going to say that I think whatever party we're talking about, it would seem to me that people in any political party would want to distance themselves from appearing to be the party of sexual perpetrators. Mm-hmm. So,
what do you think?
This is an opportunity for both parties to make that clear.
Yeah, and it really is. If you are a hyper-partisan Republican and you really want a conservative Supreme Court, this would be an opportunity to be a hero by distancing yourself from someone who is, at the very least, is so obviously temperamentally unsuited to be on the Supreme Court. You could stand for a principle and still be in favor of a conservative appointment to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There are other conservative justices who don't have this kind of baggage out there. Mm-hmm. And I would probably oppose them for a lot of, of their positions on judicial issues. But there's a difference between judicial issues and someone who has a specific temperament and an attitude toward women that is just, it's reprehensible. Mm-hmm. And I see that in Kavanaugh. Every time he opens his mouth, the way he interacts with female senators, and just how he talks in general. And I don't think he's changed a lot since he was in high school.
Well, the way he interacted with his own wife on that televised interview,
exactly.
interrupting her, not letting her answer, and we saw more of that in his response to the questions by the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yeah. Just let's pretend for an instant that he's super innocent, and we're going to talk about him just on the basis of this whole sexual assault thing. His behavior when confronted with this was just outrageous. You don't serve on the Supreme Court if you can't handle, simple questions. You know?
Right. He was defensive, which is understandable, but he was overly defensive and aggressive, and it came across as this performative response, to an allegation that it came across as very fake.
Mm-hmm. I was truly sickened hearing on various media outlets commentators talking about, both of them gave compelling testimony. Her testimony was absolutely compelling. I can certainly talk a little bit about
Please do.
about what I saw in that. But to follow up on the comments about Kavanaugh, I thought his performance was, can I use the word pathetic? I mean, it was absolutely pathetic. He was whiny. So let's get into this a little bit. He was acting like a perpetrator. What do I mean when I say that? He was very defensive. He became very angry. He seemed to just exude a sense of entitlement. How dare you ask me these questions? It seems to me if he was really sincere about wanting to clear his name and address these allegations, he would have responded to these, to everybody's questions, including the Democrats' questions, fully, sincerely, openly, authentically, instead of interrupting people, becoming belligerent, yelling, seeming to cry, whining, poor me. I've also seen some criticism of the people who are criticizing him crying, and I want to be clear, I think it is healthy for men to cry. I love it when men cry. I'm not talking about the fact that, he seemed to be crying, although I think one of you said that there were actually no tears.
No tears. That's the surest sign that someone is faking. Just a little recommendation. There's a woman who goes by Eyes for Lies, and she is a deception expert. It's scientifically based. It's fascinating. If you can look up what she says about how to detect deception, it has nothing to do with a lot of the things that people think have to do with deception, like touching your face or looking to the left and all those things that people have been taught. But anyway, one of the surest signs that you're being deceptive when you're crying is that there are no tears. Also, when your voice goes up when you're crying, like you're really trying to be upset, that's another one. And he did that. So,
yes.
I mean, in a male way. And again, yeah, men crying, cool. That's not, it's that it was deceptive.
And also this sense of entitlement, this sense of outrage. How dare you come and want to ask question me thoroughly, directly, ask hard questions about extremely credible allegations of sexual assault. If he was innocent, I think, if I was accused of sexual assault, I would do my very best to maintain my composure and answer every question fully, comprehensively, non-defensively. He came off appearing to me to be guilty.
Yeah, I think it's normal to be surprised and upset. I mean, if somebody right now walked in and accused me of stealing a car, I'd be like, what? Whoa, no, I didn't do that. But I wouldn't be like, how dare you accuse me of such a thing? That is very different. Yeah? So those are things to watch for in terms of behavior. Human behavior fascinates me. So just jumping back, I don't want to forget to go over this, because if you're still sitting there, like some people are, unfortunately, I've had some trouble on Facebook with folks like that. I don't care if you believe her or not, if you think that he was totally entitled to jump on top of her or whatever bullshit, that sort of shit that I hear. Oh, it's not, he is rotten and should not be on the Supreme Court for the following reasons. Kavanaugh would tear down Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state. He praised jurisprudence that pervasively criticized Jefferson's metaphor of a strict wall of separation between church and state. Kavanaugh argued that the Supreme Court should allow the machinery of the state, our public schools, to be used to proselytize to students. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
He thinks that prayer, open prayer in school, should be. It's not like we have right now with the moment of silence, the thinly veiled church. And yeah, he wants it to be outright.
And to be clear, if a student voluntarily chooses to do that, a student can do that at any time. There's no law that says a student can't pray in the lunchroom or the library or whatever.
And let me guess, Kavanaugh is probably not in favor of, okay, it's Monday, we're going to have Muslim students lead a prayer, and today we're going
Yeah,
to
I'm
have
sure
the
that-
pagan students lead a blessing to the goddess.
Yeah.
No.
No, this is not going to happen on his watch.
And the atheist students can get up and talk today. No.
Right.
They're
Yeah, let's
talking
have a
about
secular thing.
one religion.
Yep.
Right.
Just the one that they believe in, and specifically is Catholic. So you know what that'll mean to Roe versus Wade, and yeah, okay.
And birth control.
Oh, and birth control. Yes,
And
because we're going to get to
birth
that
control.
too. Yes, right. Okay. So he has all but explicitly stated that he would overturn the central test that courts use to strike down violators of state-church separation, the Lemon Test. This is the test codifying long-standing precedent, says that a government action is unconstitutional if it, 1, doesn't have a secular purpose, 2, advances or inhibits religion, or 3, entangles the government with religion. Those are important things. They should not be
Yeah.
ditched.
They're uncontroversial things.
Yeah.
I mean, people aren't struggling with these concepts,
Right.
Except for people like Kavanaugh.
Right. What they always fail to think about is, what if your religion was not the primary religion of this country? Then would you be cool with these things?
Of course
No,
not.
of course not. It's all about privilege, and yes.
Let me tell you, most of the people that are at least nominally in support of him, if their particular flavor of Christianity were marginalized, they would not be in favor of this.
Right.
Their heads would explode. So my question is, for people who are, let's say, Southern Baptists, are you going to be cool when Catholic doctrine becomes
Yeah, they'll
the
teach
thing?
evolution in school because the
Yeah.
Pope is cool with evolution. Are you
Yeah.
cool with that?
And not only that, but Kavanaugh went to a Jesuit high school, and they're actually pretty well known for providing a good science education. So
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, yes. So tread lightly.
Yeah.
All right. He fought to uphold vouchers for private religious schools in Florida. This is a problem because when you have vouchers, they go much more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're much more likely to go to schools that are religious, because most private schools are religious. That's not cool.
right.
And they tend to benefit schools that don't really need it anyway. How many private schools do you know are struggling in terms of finding, and how many private schools do you know that are not primarily white and Christian? It's not cool.
And that's important because public schools, they have to take anyone in the district. They can't exclude anyone. Not only that, but there's this concept of meeting every student wherever they are, which means if that student has special needs, the student has to accommodate those needs. And
You mean the school has to
excuse me, the school has to accommodate those needs for that student, and basically educate that student. Private schools don't have to do that.
Right.
They can set their own rules for admission. They can set their own rules for where they're going to meet that student. And basically, if they say, okay, this is the limit that we're going to do, then that student has to meet the school where they are, which is a really messed up concept, especially if you're talking about a kid who has some kind of, let's say you have a dyslexic kid.
Right.
A private school does not have to make any accommodations for dyslexia, even though we know there are effective educational strategies that allow those students to thrive. But they can just basically be cast aside. The same thing goes for kids with, ADHD or, any other kind of condition that might cause them to learn differently than someone else.
Kids
Yeah.
who've been traumatized. Kids
Right.
who have PTSD. Maybe they've been abused. Maybe they've been through the foster care system. Those kids need a lot of support. That's expensive. Private schools typically don't provide that unless perhaps to wealthy families.
And when you talk about looking at differences in performance standards between certain private schools and public schools, a lot of times a public school's performance is a proxy measure of the economic status of the parents in that district.
Yeah.
So if you have students who are performing poorly, the odds are the socioeconomic status of the parents is not it's not exactly middle class. Okay, they're working 2 jobs. There's, maybe the kid doesn't have enough to eat or whatever. So you can't compare those two. The other thing is there's a concept in social sciences, and I guess in some of the what they call hard sciences too. It's called creaming the data. That's where you basically take the data that essentially supports what you want it to show, and you only account for that data. You only use that data in your research. Essentially, that's what private schools are doing because they're excluding those students who might potentially bring down the performance standards. They have a creamed population that they're looking at. So by not having these kids that need special help, of course they're going to show better performance standards. It's by design. So, public schools get a bad rap just from that. And people say, oh, our public schools are failing, they're a disaster. They're not. I mean, my kid goes to a phenomenal public school. It is absolutely phenomenal. Every one of the teachers in there, they're fully committed to doing whatever they can to help the students there.
Yeah. I've had the same experience. I put my son and daughters actually into two different private schools, and I can tell you that anybody who wants the voucher system to be used, they have the money to go to a private school. They want their private school fixed in some way, or have the resources. That's so privileged and skewed. Anyhow, we had some good things in the private schools. There were some good aspects to it. But by and large, I have been thrilled with public school because we've gone to public school more recently. They've been, if you find those advocates, and it's a wonderful thing. But they do have to deal with everybody. Everybody. And when we went to the private schools, they were like, you're on your own. I mean, one person essentially blamed me for my son not being able to read. What? Yeah, you're supposed to be teaching him. And they assumed it was something I'd done. Once he got a good teacher, he learned to read in a couple months. Anywho, so yeah. So there's that. That's why we don't think vouchers are cool. That's the very long story. Kavanaugh defends religious privilege while trampling the rights of women. Last year, he argued unsuccessfully, thank goodness, that the government could force a 17-year-old girl detained as an illegal immigrant to continue her unwanted pregnancy. Catholic.
Yeah.
With conditions that essentially would have forced her to carry the pregnancy to term. But to Kavanaugh, that was not an, quote, undue burden on her rights, because he sees women as vessels to provide babies.
Yes.
And once the baby's born, screw taking care of it. But, that unborn child business.
Yeah.
No bodily autonomy there. It's just...
Right. And this young immigrant, she was a teenager, she had support from people. She had an attorney. She had people counseling her. This was her decision. No one was coercing her. She was very clear that she wanted the abortion, and he threw up every roadblock he could to prevent her from accessing a safe, legal medical procedure in this country.
It's legal, y'all.
Constitutionally protected.
Exactly.
Right. And they've tried to stand in the way of it.
Who thinks it's a good idea for a 17-year-old in detention to be forced to carry a child that she doesn't want? Does that make any sense at all?
No, it doesn't. People who don't understand that women are human beings.
In some religious communities, that's the way infertile white Christian couples obtain infants to adopt. So there's quite the little market for that.
God,
It's gross.
It's abhorrent. All righty, and then there's one last little goodie that Kavanaugh is well known for, and Jen already talked about it a little bit. He would allow religious employers to deny women contraception in spite of the Affordable Care Act's contraception mandate, because of a 2-page form. The female employee's freedom is what's really threatened. But Kavanaugh twisted the case in defense of the religious freedom of the employer instead. Oh my God. So wrong on so many levels. I just... Who is an employer to tell me how to take care of my body?
Well, my question for things like this, because several years ago I worked for a guy that I later found out was a Jehovah's Witness. And so I got employer-provided health insurance through, that company. My question is, if he had said, hey, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, you can't get a blood transfusion if you need it.
Right.
Or any blood
Exactly.
products if you need them.
Yep.
Because that violates my religious freedom. Is that cool? I mean, is that what Kavanaugh is going to advocate?
All right.
Or is it just that a woman's body is property and,
It has everything to do with
Yeah.
gender. It has everything to do
Yeah.
with gender. So that's all of the actual news type data and why he is a bad apple. What I want to talk about now and why I have Leanne here is because I want to talk about the thing that has frustrated me most, and that is how people have been viewing what Ford went through, what her choices were, and why she made those choices, how they are valid and normal, and go from there. There's so much there.
I think a place to start is when I saw a news report of President Trump's tweet. If, not even a question, a statement, if this had, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote. Cool. If this had been as terrible, as a terrible crime, as serious as is being claimed, she would have made a police report. There would have been a police report many years ago, either by her or her loving parents. When I read that, I actually laughed out loud, not because I thought it was funny, but because it was so ludicrous. There are many, many reasons why survivors do not report sexual assault. Even to their, especially to their parents. That's usually one of the reasons. And one of the things Ford said is she wasn't going to go to her parents and tell them, I was at a party, I had a beer, I was with boys. She was someplace where she wasn't supposed to be. So note to parents, tell your kids, a good policy is tell your kids if you're ever in a situation where you are uncomfortable or you feel unsafe, call me, I will come and get you, and there will be no questions asked.
Right.
And no punishment, really.
Right, and no punishment. Absolutely, no punishment.
Or judgment, for that matter.
We could come back to that in another show.
Yeah.
So I was looking at statistics. There's trying to say how many sexual assaults go unreported is something that can only be estimated, obviously, because it's something that's not reported. So looking at various statistics, what seems valid, and Washington Post, I saw this in a Washington Post report, that it's probably most accurate to give a range, and their estimate, which I think is probably pretty accurate based on my experience working with survivors, is that about 5 to 20% of actual rapes or sexual assaults are reported. That means about anywhere from 80 to 95% of rapes and sexual assaults go unreported. And of those rapes that are reported, very few go to trial, of those, okay, let me put it this way. Of those that are reported, only about 1 to 2% end up resulting in actual jail or prison time.
We have the RAIN figure, if you want to put that up for a second.
Yeah,
Mark,
please do. Now, their statistics were that were a little different.
Let me see.
Go ahead and put those up.
I'm looking for my...
Their statistics, which I don't have here, were actually a little higher. I think maybe 33%, something like that.
Let me find.
According to NARAL, I think, said 28% get reported to police departments. But I would say if you want to make a generous estimate of how many get reported, 30 to 33%. That means
God,
we have
that's
at least
outrageously high.
2/3 of rapes never get reported.
Right.
Hey, Mark, could you put the rain figure up there, the one with all the little people figures, and it shows what number? Thanks. He's looking for it. RAIN stands for Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, and they gather statistics on these sorts of things. And just as an informal little poll, I put a poll on the Godless Bitches Facebook, the Atheist Experience discussion group, and Talk Heathen, and said, have you ever been assaulted? I didn't specify sexual assault. I'll come back to that. We've got one of them up here, and which one is that? It's very far away.
Yeah. Well, basically, that's 9 out of 10 victims of rape are female.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Right.
Yes. So this is a great time to jump in and remind people, as I do at every opportunity, that we're not just talking about women and girls here. We're also talking about men and boys, and of course, people who identify as gender fluid are even more at risk for rape, sexual assault, molestation.
yeah.
Right.
And that was one of the things that came out of the military, like sexual assault scandal, which has not actually been fully resolved.
No, of course not.
One of the things that came out of that was that if you look at the numbers, just the raw numbers, there were actually more male rape victims than female rape victims.
Well, that's because there's more men in the military than females.
Exactly.
You know,
And
the
so
same
that
would be true in prison, I'm sure.
That skewed the numbers significantly. The percentage of women sexually assaulted in the military was much higher
Right.
versus men. But it illustrated the fact that it is a problem. It's a problem not because there's all these like gay men raping other men. It's a power thing. A power thing, an entitlement thing.
Exactly.
And the willingness of commanders to look the other way when this stuff is going on. And that's what we have right now with, in general. People are so willing to write off behavior that, it's obviously criminal, it's aggressive, it's, it is, some of it is, while not actual rape, it's a precursor to that. They're working their way up to it. And I saw a graphic recently that had sort of the behaviors that constitute normalization, and then there's some escalation where it becomes degradation, and finally, outright assault. And yeah, it's a spectrum. Every escalation builds on everything that happens previously. So if you make rape jokes or you say boys will be boys, or that's normalization. When you start calling women gendered slurs and degrading women for expressing their own sexual agency, now you're getting into degradation. And then when you move on to putting your hands on someone without their consent, now you're moving into assault.
That's all. Yeah.
What you're talking about is rape culture.
Exactly.
I have a friend or two who object to that term, but I stand by the belief that, to use your phrase, unfortunately, our culture in general normalizes rape and sexual violence.
Right.
It really, really does. And if you don't believe it, look at any romantic movie. Star Wars, famous one, where Han Solo kisses Leia. She doesn't want to be kissed, and it's romantic.
Yeah.
No, she's trembling. Yeah. God. So wrong.
Yeah.
Mark, there's another graphic, the one with the little people in it. It's got lots of little people in it. That one. Okay.
Yeah.
It shows how there are the number of women who are sexually assaulted, or I don't know if it's just women. I can't see this. Just the
I would say
thing.
people.
It's but
Yeah.
and then the number who report, the number who go to prosecution, and the number who actually the number of women whose assault person, I can't think, sorry. Perpetrator is convicted is extraordinarily small. And I mean, that's why. And the other thing that they don't even talk about is when you report, I started to say, I took this informal poll and I said, have you ever been assaulted? I didn't even say sexually assaulted. And if you have, did you report it?
Right.
And it was just a yes or a no. And of course, lots of people volunteered information that they didn't have to. But they said, of course I didn't report it, because I don't want to have the stuff go on that goes on. And there were people who said, yes, I reported it, and I regretted having done so because they put me through so much hell.
Right.
It is not a victim-friendly system.
No, I could talk about that a little bit.
Please.
Yes, please.
So, just want to repeat that I worked for over 22 years at the Safe Alliance, which is Austin's Center for Sexual and Domestic Violence, currently in private practice. And between those two experiences, I estimate I've worked with about 3,800 survivors of sexual and or domestic violence. So I have a pretty good background in this, and I always say, when it comes up with clients or anyone, I always express that I feel very strongly the survivor has the right to decide whether they are going to report or not. It is not the survivor of rape or sexual assault to stop rape in our society. We cannot put that burden on her or him or them. That because they've already been through an extremely intrusive, one of the most intrusive experiences anybody can ever have. They've already been through that. To then put the burden on them of stopping the rapist, may further compound the trauma that they're experiencing. In order for a sexual assault charge to have much of a chance, or to have a really even a minimal chance of going forward, it's necessary to go for a sexual assault forensic exam, a SAFE exam, which is an extremely intrusive and traumatizing exam. Further, then there's the interviews. Then even Austin Police Department has come a long way. I've worked with survivors who did report and had actually a really good experience with our sex crimes detectives, or even beat cops, where they were, very sensitive. Even so, it's a very painful, re-traumatizing situation to talk in excruciating detail about the assault. Not everybody has that good of an experience, and I've heard of plenty of people who had horrific experiences from law enforcement here and in other places. So no wonder people don't want to report.
So trauma is a word that unfortunately has been really denigrated, and I want for you to explain what trauma means.
Very happy to do that. I am a trauma therapist. Trauma is something, so Dr. Blasey Ford talked a lot about brain chemistry and encoding of memories. I would refer you to her testimony if you want more of that. I'm definitely not a science wonk, but I do know trauma, both from my own experiences and those of my clients. And from the psychological material that is considered to be the standard in this and in other countries. A trauma occurs when a person is faced with either life-threatening behavior or something that intrudes upon their bodily integrity. So whether or not the person thinks they may die, a sexual violation is likely to be traumatic. When any of us are faced with any kind of threat, whether it's a sexual assault, you're hiking in the woods and you see a bear is running towards you. Your body brain is going to react with fight or flight. It's automatic. It's not something that you typically are going to stand there and think, I need to fight or I need to run. It happens lightning fast. That is that helps us survive because that way we're not standing there thinking, which way should I go while the bear eats us? If we are trapped and we're unable to fight and unable to run, if the bear corners us, we're going to go into the highest level of activation, which is the freeze. And freeze is adaptive because we go numb and it prepares us to be eaten. Almost any child abuse is going to result in the person experiencing some freeze. In most cases of sexual assault, the person is unable to escape. That's, until they, at least for part of the time, they may experience that feeling of being trapped. And so my understanding is that this unresolved fight or flight response is what results in the trauma.
Right. Yeah, so most of the people listening to the podcast probably know that I spent 26 years in the Army. I'm a combat vet, and
Cool.
I was a Black Hawk pilot, and so I know a little bit about stress response.
A little bit. Oh my God.
And I mean, one of the things, there are levels, like you were saying, of stress. And some of them are very functional for certain circumstances. So if you are in a certain level of stress response, you begin to lose fine motor control, but you have your gross motor control is excellent. And that is the point where you're most able to counter a physical threat. But there's a fine line between that and then moving into a higher level of stress where you begin to shut down. You freeze.
Yes.
While you're in these windows of stress, certain senses can shut down. So people who are in a combat situation in a firefight, they may be in a high level of stress where their gross motor control is very good, and they are at the optimum point of surviving that firefight. And during that firefight, at the end, they realize they didn't hear the weapons firing because their sense of hearing shut down completely. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, they won't suffer any damage to their hearing because of being in close proximity to weapons either. It's like the whole thing just shuts down.
I always wondered about that. Okay.
Yeah, and when their hearing comes back, sound suddenly floods back in. Mm-hmm. They become aware of it again, and then they become aware of, their buddy lying there, screaming because he's wounded or whatever. But they didn't hear any of that stuff going on while it was happening.
Fascinating. Basically, we screen out details that are not needed for our survival.
And so, it's no wonder that people who are faced with some kind of interpersonal violence would experience a gap where,
Yes.
I didn't hear, the loud noise next door because your hearing shut down. Mm-hmm. It wasn't important right now.
What did he say to you?
Yeah. I don't know.
But I remember the laughter.
Yeah.
Is what she said.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You remember specific things, or I don't remember anything that was said, but I remember his smell. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are specific details that still get through, but that's all part of that stress response. And there are ways of inoculating someone against that kind of stress. It's part of what combat training is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. You can stress inoculate, and pilot training is really good for it, by the way.
Are there any unintended side effects of that training? Are there any adverse effects of going through that training?
Well, not really, unless you get someone who becomes so hypervigilant all the time. And hopefully, there are psychological exams that people have to pass to get into certain career fields that would hopefully screen people out who are very susceptible to being, kind of stuck in this hypervigilant state.
Well, because you hear of so many veterans who maybe they performed really well in combat, and then they come home
Yeah.
and they feel out of touch, out of place, can't get along
Well,
with their families. Those
that's-
are men and women who've been traumatized. I would
Yeah,
say.
and that's actually the result of the actual trauma, because there's some things
Okay.
that you can improve someone's performance through stress inoculation. What you can't do is completely insulate them from experiencing the trauma that they'll see on a battlefield.
This seems like a great time to jump in with some information. There's a man named Bessel van der Kolk who is a great, psychiatrist, I think is his profession. He basically discovered post-traumatic stress disorder, and he went from working at the VA. I think this was like the late '60s, early '70s. Was working at the VA with veterans, and the treatment was making them worse, and so he realized there's something going on here. Oh, they have post-traumatic stress. Went from there to work in a Boston hospital and was working with all these women who were sexually abused, which was a shocker for one thing, is they actually thought it was very rare at that time. And he noticed, oh, these women are having the same
Right.
symptoms as the male veterans I had been working with.
Right.
And I just kind of want to mention something that I have thought for many years, is that the people with whom I work, there's been a lot written about how the body's the battleground. These are people who have experienced trauma on the level or near levels of combat veterans.
Yes, and in fact, they used to call it rape trauma syndrome. Now it's actually recognized as it's actually PTSD. That's the result of interpersonal violence, and for a social species, interpersonal violence is the most terrifying event you can encounter. That when you're looking someone in the eye and you know they're either going to kill you or do serious bodily harm to you, that's the most terrifying situation you can be in. And I would say it's even probably worse than being eaten by a bear.
Yeah, because, bears, that's what they do.
Yeah, it's just he's doing what he's doing, right?
You escape the bear. If you escape,
Yeah.
people are going to, say, what a great story. You escaped a bear.
Yeah.
Or how awful. I mean, that's clearly terrifying. Nobody's going
right.
to question
It's
you.
terrifying.
What were you doing?
What were
Did
you
you
wearing?
have chapstick on you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you wearing? Did you wear your bacon
right.
shirt that day?
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, so, God.
Yeah. So I know that Leanne has to go soon, so I wanted to
What
get
time
to
is it?
some. Yeah, it's we're like 4
Oh.
minutes.
I can
away.
stay a little after since we
Okay.
started a little
So
bit.
one of the things I wanted to talk about was this claim that, if it happened, why didn't she report it? So why people don't report. And one of the things that I learned through a recent experience with a young family member of mine is that teenagers or preteens who are assaulted or molested in some way often do disclose things that we should be paying attention to. One of the things that they may do is float a trial balloon to a trusted adult to see how they
Yes.
respond.
Yes.
Something about, I don't want to go to Uncle Joe's this weekend,
Right.
just to see what the reaction is. And if they get a positive response, they may disclose something else. That, well, I don't like the way Uncle Joe acts around me. And if they get a positive response to that, they may disclose some other details. Sometimes they don't disclose any details unless they're directly asked. But they do often say things.
And important to add, sometimes, even if they're directly asked, they may say no.
Right.
They've been threatened.
They've been threatened,
Yes.
and sometimes, okay, there are teenagers. I've worked with clients who were groomed and seduced by much older men as teenagers. I think I have also had this experience with a few male clients, and they think of it as they're in love with this person. I'm talking about much older. I'm not talking about a few years older. I think
Right.
that you would look at on a case-by-case basis. But when there's a big power imbalance, there's definitely a risk for that being a traumatizing negative experience. So sometimes it may be years later before they realize, oh, he wasn't just a jerk. That was abusive. That was really not okay.
Right.
Okay.
So they may not tell because they're covering for somebody.
Yeah. And one of the things that that also I kind of recognized in this young relative of mine was that the perpetrator at trial and through police interviews and everything, one of the things he kept doing was supplying motives for why she was lying. It wasn't, and these were just outrageous things. She was jealous of time he spent with, other kids or whatever, or she was just trying to get attention. Mm-hmm. She wanted his attention. It's like, what teenager gets an adult man's attention by accusing him of molesting her?
Yeah.
That makes no sense at all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and it turns out this guy was already on the sex offender registry. He had been convicted of statutory rape as a younger man. Mm-hmm. He was legally an adult. His girlfriend, we don't know exactly how old she was because she was a minor, and that information was redacted from any of the records. But she was under 16. And then at trial, it came out his own sister testified against him and said that he had engaged in similar behavior with her.
Good for her.
And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a good time to acknowledge, because people will, if anybody is watching this and questioning this, false allegations happen. I mentioned I've worked with an estimated 3,800 people who are survivors, and less than a handful of those, there was something about the situation that caused me to question.
Right.
One was a woman living in a group home, and she obviously was being I don't know if it was a false allegation or not, but she was very vindictive towards a staff person and said, yes, I want to get him fired. Mm-hmm. So just it's important to acknowledge that can happen. Federal statistics estimate that about 2% of sexual assault allegations are false allegations, the same as other crimes,
Yeah, I was gonna
like
say that's
robbery or murder.
in line with other crimes.
So what we do not have a huge problem with people making false allegations.
Yeah.
What we do have is a huge incidence of sexual assaults that go unreported.
Right.
And part of the reason they go unreported is that the survivor knows they're going to be facing a very hostile environment if they report.
Well, and I think this is a good time to bring up an email that recently came in, because this guy emailed, and he actually wanted to talk to either me or Tracy about this. Something has been bothering him about the Me Too movement, especially in light of the Kavanaugh hearings. And it seems like one of the central messages of Me Too has been that we should believe accusers when it comes to sexual assault and rape. And that's deeply problematic for him to accept, because it's basically a form of dogma to believe accusers or will consider you to be sexist. And he says he generally supports the goals of the movement, but he's very concerned about this central tenet, and he can't think of any reason why sexual assault claims should be special in not placing the burden of proof on the person making the claim, despite the fact that he knows that's a terrible burden to bear for the victims, but he just doesn't see a way around it.
Me.
Yeah.
Me. I put a lot of thought into this. First of all, it depends on who's doing the believing. If your friend or family member or your child or your parent tells you that they have an experience of sexual violence, it's extremely important to keep an open mind, stay calm, and at least approach it with a good, in good faith, with an assumption of good faith. This person is telling me this for a reason. They're telling me this because they need support. The vast majority of times, the odds are 98% probably that person is telling you the truth. What does that person need from you? They need support. They need options. They need autonomy. To me, that's what we mean by start by believing. If you're law enforcement, your job is to keep an open mind. Your job is not to doubt them. Your job is not to jump to whatever they're saying is automatically true. But also, law enforcement's approach can be informed by what we know, that there's a 98% chance this person is telling the truth. The chance of traumatizing that person by being tough with them and disbelieving is something that's really risky. So, point one, it depends on who we're asking to believe. I want to say that something I actually have kept to myself and have been thinking it's time to make a statement about this, perhaps on social media. I'm a little bothered by saying we have to believe every woman, we have to believe everything. That can be very confusing. We have to believe every survivor. Yes, in general, believe survivors. That doesn't mean that without looking at the veracity of all the people involved, or looking at evidence, that doesn't mean that
you still
we
want
need to
evidence.
just ignore.
Right.
We need to look at every situation with an open mind.
Right.
There can be false allegations. There could be politically motivated allegations. I went into watching this hearing, even though my bias is honestly towards believing Dr. Ford. I did look at it with an open mind and curiosity, and I found everything. We don't have time to go into it now, but everything about her case, you can Google it. I heard a prosecutor speaking about why he would have taken her case, the things that he looks for into whether or not a case can move forward. Those things were all present in her case. I found her to be compelling and completely authentic and credible. Kavanaugh, on the other hand, I think he may really not believe that night. That is not very convincing when the reports are that, if drunken groping and attempted rape of women was a thing that he participated in regularly, why would he remember this one?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was too drunk to remember is really not a compelling defense.
Yeah.
Or even a rebuttal.
Right.
Well, he says that never happened to him.
Yeah.
Also, not credible.
Right.
Yeah. The notion that women would do this to, quote, get attention is outrageous. What sort of attention? I don't want my well-being and those I love to be threatened. That's ludicrous. If you have one person that comes forward, 98% chance they're telling the truth, right? A second person, statistically, you are damn near sure that person has been a perpetrator. Third person, that's it. Statistically, they are a perpetrator. That's the end.
Well, and that's kind of the point I want to get. These people who are hyper-focused on evidence and, these women that come forward and they claim to have been assaulted, there's no evidence. It's like, look, their statement is evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yay! Mm-hmm. Yes, that frustrates me so much.
There will be details in their statement that are evidence. Mm-hmm. And for all the women who are disclosing assaults in general on social media saying, hey, this happened to me when I was in high school, when I was in college, whatever, and they're not naming a perpetrator.
There's good reason.
There's a good reason for that. They don't want to make a formal report. They probably had good reasons for not reporting it when it actually happened, but they're adding their voices to this. And if you're going to discount all that and say, well, I just don't believe those people without evidence, you know what? Fuck you. Yeah. You kind of miss the whole point of the movement.
Yeah.
Which is that this is a huge problem of women not reporting it because they don't feel safe. And if you're one of these guys who's hyper-focused on some kind of corroborating evidence of multiple women on social media disclosing, hey, these things are common, this happens to me, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
You are contributing to rape culture, and this is why women don't report.
Yeah. And the men who are afraid because, oh my gosh, that they might take me down next. Welcome to my fucking world.
Yeah.
Women have put up with this shit. We live this shit. My poor husband over the past few weeks has heard all sorts of stuff. Somebody on Facebook has it out for me. They have turned me in for being a fake account a number of times just to keep me from talking. I don't know how many people put up with that.
Goodness.
It's because I'm a woman. There's no other reason.
Yeah.
We put up with this shit all the fucking time. Go cry someplace else if this is scary for you.
And this idea that it's open season on men and that you have to worry about a false allegation.
Only if you...
The overwhelming majority, and by that I mean almost all men, will go their entire lives and never be accused of sexual assault or even misconduct. Okay? Among the very small percentage of men who are actual rapists,
Yes.
very few of them will ever be held accountable for their behavior. So all of you out there, you know, and an even tinier number of men will ever face a false allegation. So, yeah, go cry somewhere else. Not interested.
Yeah.
You're really not under threat. And you know, the thing is, if you're worried about some woman claiming that you sexually assaulted her, maybe you need to take a look at your own behavior with women. There might be a problem there.
Yep. There's a reason why you may be a little bit anxious.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are over time, and Leanne needs to go. Jen, thank you for another great show.
You too.
Leanne, thank you so much for lending your voice to this, and I appreciate you coming so much. This has been really a fantastic show. I'd also like to thank all the people on the other side of the wall who help put this thing together for us every time. Oh my gosh, I was having a fit before the show, and they completely talked me off the ledge and helped me. So just technical stuff. And so I have this one last thing to leave you with. We don't need a savior. We have each other. It's all we've ever had, and it's all we'll ever need. Bye.
Bye.